You're watching The Experience, Comic Culture and Sales. Streaming live daily to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter.
2, 1.
So, one of my other jobs that I do outside of The Experience is that I work sometimes with people who are in the political arena. And we're not going to talk about politics, so don't even start. But one of the things that they talk about a lot is something called institutional memory. And it's this idea that there are certain people in certain jobs inside any organization, really, that have been doing those jobs for so long and at such a high level that they can't be fired, essentially. And the thing they bring to the table when they do this is an innate knowledge of how things should, could, and need to go. A great example is, when a school hires a new superintendent, they don't fire all the principals, right? They don't fire all the staff just because the school got a new superintendent. They keep that institutional memory of how things work and what works, and then they let the new staff come in and make some changes. That's kind of what we're talking about today, is this idea of institutional memory, or how long is too long for someone to tell one story. And we're going to get into that in more depth here in a second. But I just want to give a shout out to everybody who's joining us, Kenneth, Matt, everybody over on Instagram, for coming in. This is going to be an interesting topic because there's a lot that goes into it. And just know, as always on this show, there is no right answer unless you agree with me. This is Devil's Advocates. Welcome in, everybody. This is the Devil's Advocates. I am producer Kyle. That is Bronze Age Nerd with his camera all fixed from last week. So hopefully we won't have problems like it's the 80s and we have to adjust our antenna and the knobs on the back of the TV. So
I got my kid with rabbit ears and tinfoil on the roof.
Right.
It's great.
Stand on one leg. Don't move. Don't move. I can see the football game. Don't move.
Open your mouth.
Right. Your dental work is interfering with the signal.
Yeah.
Oh
man. Some glorious stuff that I'm oddly nostalgic for that was actually terrible.
Same.
Which kind of ties into tonight's subject in some ways.
We're going to call that the Rob Liefeld rule.
Yeah.
Not good, but we're nostalgic for it.
Right.
Well, welcome in, everybody. Tonight's topic is creators who have long runs on one character and institutional memory as it relates to comic book characters. We kind of referenced it there, but recently the news came out that Rob Liefeld was retiring from Deadpool. I don't know what that means because he hadn't really done it in a while, but hey, you want to retire. Learn to draw.
Out for my homies.
Learn to draw feet. So, Bronze, you brought that story to my attention. So why don't can you fill us in on sort of the Rob Liefeld of it all?
For sure. Before I do, though, I just got to point out, learn to draw feet, but wouldn't it be weird if all of a sudden Rob Liefeld just was drawing perfect feet and that would be like Uncanny Valley type stuff.
He starts an OnlyFans page and it's just Rob Liefeld style drawings of feet.
I would be nervous. Yeah. So basically, the part of the problem here is there was additional information that came out on a podcast he did that, full disclosure, I did not listen to the podcast because when the press release came out, it was a forthcoming thing. And I don't know if it's available for free out there. I'll have to go track it down at some point. So basically what Rob Liefeld was saying is that He thought it was time to move on from the character of Deadpool to pursue other interests that are currently more entertaining and more fulfilling for him. He did point out, I'll call it the Seinfeld effect, where he said that he didn't want to be drawing a lower quality as things like dexterity and stuff as he aged started to fall off a little bit. Which, by the way, in a vacuum, I can respect that. I think that's that's an important point, right? Some creators keep going, and we see their art maybe fall off. Like there was a off lamented John Cassaday piece that came out of Beast not too long ago. Maybe there was something else going on with that. I'm just saying, we all kind of hate to see, like, Frank Miller's had some questionable pieces out there that didn't really match up the style. So in a vacuum, I kind of understand that. I think even he's saying, like, he's not there yet for his style of artwork. He's just worried about what the future is going to hold, and he wants to focus on other endeavors. So that's basically it in a nutshell. He did say there was going to be more information coming soon about why he was moving away from it. If anybody in chat happened to catch that podcast, please feel free to give us the Cliff's Notes versions of that. We'd love to hear it.
Right. And so it kind of opens us up to, we started talking about, Bronze brought this story to my attention, and we got to thinking about other creators who have had long tenured runs on stories, on certain characters. Spider-Man with Stan Lee and Dan Slott. They both had incredibly long runs on that character. I mean, Spawn hasn't come out that Todd McFarlane hasn't touched. Eric Larson on Savage Dragon. I'm trying to think of some other ones here off the top of my head, and I know we had named a bunch of them, but my brain is pounding so hard I can't even think of it right now. Some of these other long, Jeff Johns on Green Lantern.
You want me to throw out a few more examples?
Yes, please.
So ones that I thought of too, and we'll probably dive into a few of these in more detail later on. Robert Kirkman had long runs on both Invincible and The Walking Dead, for example. I think a really fun example, and something I'd love to talk about a little bit, maybe because as it relates to that character, there's been a lot of really good long runs on Daredevil. You got Miller and Klaus Johnson, Zdarsky. You had Bendis, Brubaker, Mark Waid. A lot of really prominent creators had really successful runs on that title. Not necessarily hugely long, but really they're identifiable with that title and that character. So
they're not Larry Hama on G.I. Joe long.
No, they're not. Claremont on X-Men, for example, is another one that comes to mind. Yeah, there's those ones, but there's also just creators that are somewhat synonymous with their runs on characters and how they've had interesting runs with their people.
Sure. I mean, we could talk about that too as part of this, but I think we were kind of phrasing our topic in this idea of when a creator has had a long run with a single character. And again, we're going to talk about some of the less long but certainly significant runs in a minute. But when we have, if you guys in chat could think of any other, I can't believe how long this creator worked on this one title.
Larson on Savage Dragon, like that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Right. Throw them in chat. It starts, Brian Pulido on Lady Death. Right.
That counts.
I don't know how much Brian Pulido is writing Lady Death anymore, so much as just publishing it.
He's ostensibly pretty involved.
Right. But that's a great example because he still oversees every aspect of it.
Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of when I talk about Stan Lee with Spider-Man, is that Stan didn't write Spider-Man for 50 years, but he had his finger in that pot for a long, long, long time.
Yeah.
And so we kind of wanted to take a look at, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And are there instances from our lists that are column A or column B?
Yeah, kind of that idea of especially exploring the concept of when is the sweet spot for a creator to leave a title to where it opens the door for other creative energies to come in and make that title better. But also notable examples of where maybe a creator had a pretty good long run on a book, and then it would have been maybe kind of cool to see where they would have went with it if they stayed on the book in some cases too.
Right. An example like that is somebody like a Tom King, right? Did 50 issues on Batman, or 50 whatever it was, 51 issues on Batman, and then takes off. Well, what would have happened had he gotten to 100 issues like was originally planned?
Yeah.
And Jay's asking the question, is this just writers or artists included? And I think the answer to that question is yes, artists are included, because Rob Liefeld.
Mhm.
I think yes, artists are included. But what we're really talking about is the control of the character, right? Like, I don't know how you feel, Brown. We never really kind of came down on this when we were kind of planning out the show and talking about the show. But when you hear that somebody, oh yeah, like Mark Bagley on some Spider-Man stuff, and all of his work with Mark Waid, but that's really not one character specific, so we'll figure that out. Where do you come down on this? Do you like it when creators are on a story for a long time and can really do a lot, or would you prefer to see more rapid turnover and new ideas being infused? Where do you find the sweet spot?
Yeah, I love the nuance of this question, because at first it's an easy answer in my head. I'm like, oh, I like stability on a run. So I generally will favor the longer runs on the surface level. But when I dive deeper, I think that, we talked about this at one point as part of what inspired some of the tone of the show. Larry Hama on G.I. Joe. I'm a massive G.I. Joe fan. I'll be one of the first to admit, though, that as much as I love Larry Hama, I'm excited to see what other creators can do with G.I. Joe now. Does that mean I don't think Larry Hama should be involved with G.I. Joe on any level? No, I think that there's definitely room for him to be involved there. But I am kind of curious to see where we could go with that title. I think, when the news was announced that Skybound was taking over G.I. Joe and Transformers, of course, there was some curiosity of does that mean that Robert Kirkman could be involved in writing some G.I. Joe? That would have been fascinating to me to see, for example. And there's a lot of other great examples. The who of it doesn't matter as much, although it does matter because there's been other people on G.I. Joe and they haven't delivered as good of product in a lot of cases, in my personal opinion, as Larry Hama did when he was especially in his prime. So for me, there are examples of things that I love where it's almost like a little too much of a good thing. It sort of sours the whole project. The other part of that is sometimes I feel like writers get either too comfortable or too familiar with their characters, and they need a break. They need to go work on something else. They need to go, get some more inspiration, go have some other life experiences to develop more for that title. But then there's examples of writers that have been on a title for a long time, and I wish we could have gotten more of them too. So it kind of works both ways. But I generally think that stability is good. So I don't know if that comes down to an editorial decision where you work for your publisher, you have these ideas, you say, hey, here's kind of the arc. Here's my 2-year, 3-year, 4-year plan for this title. Those would be nice. Instead, we end up with these arcs that are 6 issues long sometimes, and then the artist bounces off the title, or the writer will bounce off the title, and we get somebody else on it. I do enjoy more stability along those lines, but when you start getting up to 150, 200 issues, I think sometimes it's time for change.
Right. See, I come down a little bit in that same boat, right? I like stability, but I also think that if one voice tells a story for too long, eventually that voice gets washed out.
Yep. That's a good way to put it.
And what I mean by that is this, is that I have a number in my head. I'll just tell you. In a long run, I think if somebody's doing more than 20 consecutive issues, it's time to move on.
Okay.
Not forever, but for X. Right? So, for instance, if every 20 issues during the Dan Slott run of Spider-Man, if we had a small interruption for 6 issues and had a Matt Fraction story or a Chip Zdarsky story or a Zeb Wells story or a Joe Quesada story, or a, whoever doing just a 6-issue art, even if the artist doesn't change. And then let Dan come back and pick back up and do another however many stories, right?
Yeah.
It lets you infuse some new ideas. It lets that writer work on something else they want to work on. It lets them get caught up and maybe unburied, right? Like, if you're going to write 100 issues or something, it would be pretty easy, in my opinion, to say, I have my 100 issues, this is what I want to write, and then get like this, right? Get tunnel vision, not see the world around you. So there's some benefit to this idea of, hey, let's fracture off for a minute and tell a little side quest story here, and then come back to the main story. Just to give that writer a chance to refresh and come back to it with some heat. But I also have wildly enjoyed creators who have done 150, 200 issue story arcs.
Yeah.
Where it's clear they came in with a vision, they had the whole vision plotted before they started, and they just worked to those plot points. So instead of trying to figure out how to get through a story, they're having to write to a benchmark, right? And they have to figure out how to get from Alexandria to, someplace else in The Walking Dead that's name I can't think of right now.
The hilltop, yeah, whatever.
Right, to the hilltop, right, or to the colony, or whatever. Yeah. They have to figure out how to write that. And that in and of itself is forcing them to be creative.
Yeah.
I agree with Bron. Sometimes these stories, these runs get so long that the stability is almost counterproductive to the creativity.
Yeah.
They get too comfortable. Their voice gets washed out. So I think that's a good kind of a good plan, right?
Yeah, what I was going to say is that I think that the nucleus of what I was trying to say earlier, you kind of helped me cement that a little bit when you were explaining your side of it, because I think we pretty much agree on this. I just want to make sure that the creative team is given the leash to tell their story. As long, if they come in, like you said, if they have that 150, 200 issue plan and it's a solid plan and everybody's on board, then don't rush them. Don't say, okay, well, actually, we're going to derail your run on this character with these 3 event books over the next 2 years. That's going to completely destroy the momentum you're building for your narrative. So I think that it's kind of that, I'm thinking a lot of the big two when we think of these long runs, and independents are definitely part of it, but thinking about the big two and the characters that they control, when editorial and the division of that particular company that wants to lead the X-Men titles or the Avengers or whatever, they need to give those creators the freedom to tell their tale the way it's supposed to be told. And if it's 20 issues and it's tight and punchy, awesome. That's a good, almost 2 years of storytelling there. If it's at 50 issues, awesome. And hey, maybe you build in those breaks where you say, I know that I'm going to leave that title for a 6-issue arc, but we're not going to completely reset the playground for the next person. Right. And they're going to be able to kind of play with that universe that we've set up. And then we get back to it. That could be great too.
Right. And because we can get into this a little bit in the next segment, because we're about on our break here. The thing we know from the business is that number 1 sell better than number 2, sell better than number 3s. So when you get deep into a run, stopping the miniseries or stopping the series and starting over with a miniseries is what's been happening. But what if that was built into your methodology, right?
Yeah.
That, hey, every 15 issues, we're essentially going to have a new number 1, a new miniseries on issue 15. Right? And then on that's going to run for 6 issues or 5 issues, get you to issue 20.
Yeah.
Right? And then you do another 15. And so at issue 35, it's another miniseries. There are ways to do this, and we're going to talk about those in just a minute. But before we get to that, we're going to take a quick break here on Devil's Advocates. But before we do, I want to remind you all about some stuff happening here on the experience, one of which is new content. Which is to say, I have a pile of stuff I'm waiting to release to you guys. But I need you to hit the share button. And if you haven't, I need you to hit the subscribe button. All right, we're doing this like a Kickstarter. We have a number of benchmarks we've laid out for ourselves going forward. And when we get to those benchmarks, we will release the new Kraken or the new content. So if you guys hit share, you hit like, you do all that kind of stuff, but make sure you're hitting subscribe and you're telling your friends to hit subscribe. That'll be hugely helpful because that will help us get our new content out to the world. Some of that content is yours, Sean. So do it. Everybody else, do what you want. Sean has to. So, but yeah, if you guys could do that, that would be huge. And then at the same time, head over to theexplive.com and sign up for our mailing list. You just can fill out the form right there on the main page. Sign up for our mailing list. Big, important mailer coming out in the next couple of days. So, be watching for that as well. So, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back after this quick word from some people who want you to buy some things.
There's something for every imagination at your local comic shop. Visit comicshoplocator.com to find a store near you.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Devil's Advocates. I am Kyle. That is Bronze Age Nerd. We are here with you every Monday night, starting at 10:30 Eastern, 7:30 Bronze's time, talking about our different thoughts on things.
It's dangerous.
Right, and today we are talking about creators who have long runs with certain characters.
Yeah.
And so what we left you with was this idea that sometimes there may be a better way to handle these long runs rather than just having someone be on a book for 5 years, 10 years, whatever. But also that there's some validity to that. So we kind of gave a list, but let's break down some of our examples. And Bronze, you have the list in front of you, so you have the con.
Okay. I have some of my personal examples that I was thinking of for sure. Okay. And really, to me, I might have approached this from a slightly different angle than Kyle did. I'm thinking about the length of a time the creator was on a title or a character, and whether or not it was effective, went too long, or was cut short, more or less. And so one of the ones that came out to me, as stuck out as an example, is one that it's always been kind of interesting. As a kid, I was born in 82. I started really seriously reading comics around 89, 90, which is a very auspicious time to be reading comics at that age. A lot of things were changing in the industry, that kind of stuff. I loved the X-Men. A lot of people really, you know that about me. So looking back on X-Men, I just thought, oh, Stan Lee wrote X-Men for a very long time. And I didn't learn until later because it was hard for me to eventually, track down a good collection of the early stuff and really read it and realize that, oh, he only really wrote 19 issues. I mean, that in the beginning. So, and I mean, that's not a short run by today's standard, but at the time, you kind of, at least maybe it's just me, but I always kind of look back on that and I would have expected it to be like 30 or 40 or 50 or something like that. Nope, just 19 issues. And yet he effectively told that story, set up those characters is probably a better way to say that, got the ball rolling. And in the end, where you end up, and you end up with, one of the greatest runs of all time, pretty much universally acclaimed. So with Claremont and specifically the Byrne era, with Claremont on X-Men, and also some other great stuff there too. I don't want to diminish that, but I know that run kind of overshadows most of Uncanny for most people. So if Stan Lee stays on X-Men forever, you never get that. And you never get some of the other great stories that would have came along, some of the other great characters that would have came along. So I think that's a kind of interesting tale of maybe where at the time, you think Stan Lee, like it'd be great for him to keep writing that title, but maybe it was better that he didn't. Maybe it opened the door. And then I mentioned it earlier. This is my other example I want to get to, is Kirkman. And I think Kirkman has a fascinating 2 long runs. From what I know of his writing of both of those titles, we'll talk about The Walking Dead, we'll talk about Invincible. And The Walking Dead, from what I understand, from what I've read and seen in interviews of him speaking about it, it was a more organic storytelling process of he led the characters where they were taking him as he wrote the story. He saw ahead a little bit, and saw, he kind of had an idea of what he thought would happen in the end, and who would live and who would die and that stuff. And he kind of led and shepherded that story. I personally look back on The Walking Dead as somebody who read it, all the way through. I started like issue 7, was reading it monthly. I think that he probably could have either handed off the reins to somebody else at some point. I don't necessarily think I would have preferred to see that, but he could have probably ended it sooner and had a tighter, more impactful story. That's just my opinion. I know a lot of people have different opinions. A lot of people have said, keep going, whatever. But then you compare that or contrast that with Invincible. And Invincible, when I read that, it feels like a fairly cohesive story. There's a couple slumps in it, but for the most part, I mean, I can't remember exactly what number it went up to, but it was similar-ish in length. It feels like a beginning, a middle, and an end. Very long acts, if you will, like a 3-act kind of story. It tells, and I know a lot of people are really interested in Invincible right now. I'm not going to give you spoilers if you're trying to read along or whatever because of the series. But it has a very real ending to it, whereas Walking Dead's ending feels maybe a little bit more like you're kind of in the middle of a story, so to speak. So those are a couple of really interesting examples to me, as somebody who kind of left at the right time, and then a one writer who had kind of both examples, maybe overstayed his welcome a little bit, and then ended perfectly. So those are a couple of examples that really stuck out to me. I have some more, but I wanted to give you a chance to react to any of that.
Well, I do want to. I think it's interesting. We'll start with the X-Men, right? And you're right. Stan only really doing 19. I think he probably did more than that by the end, but no more than 25 or 30 issues ever, right? Because he would come in and do stuff after the Claremont run here and there,
Yeah,
just
I mean,
because
yeah,
he was Stan. Like
his like actual run though was that first
right.
part.
He did only a few issues. But like a prime example is everybody talks about Chris Claremont and John Byrne, but like Roy Thomas was super influential on the X-Men.
Yeah.
And only did another 20, 25?
Sounds about right.
He didn't have a huge run, but was hugely influential on the character, right? The characters. And then with I think it's an interesting way to look at this, right? Because you had a short run with the guy who created him. Then you had Roy Thomas, who didn't do a very long run. Then you have reprints.
Yeah.
And then you have Chris Claremont. And it's arguable that the first 50 X-Men issues, which is all pre-Claremont, are as strong as anything Chris Claremont did. But what Chris Claremont did was take that strength and have it for a long time.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I wouldn't say that his writing on the characters are better than those two, but they did it much shorter, but were just as impactful. And then he did it for a long time, which is very interesting.
I think that I really have to react to that real fast, though, because I think that's a great point. But I also think you start to see the difference in eras of storytelling there a little bit, too. So that's all I would say about that.
That's exactly where I was heading.
Cool.
And And what you had happen was sort of that in that era was the transition of comic books are for children to comic books are really for whoever wants to read them. Um, there's a cultural shift, right? By the time Chris Claremont comes on, now comic books are for teenagers and college kids and young adults and right, the people who had started 50 issues earlier or 100 issues earlier.
Yeah.
With Stan and Roy Thomas, like now you have the attention span to tell long stories, whereas you might not have earlier. So it's an interesting thing, but I think the thing I want to say about Chris Claremont's run on the X-Men is this: I prefer Roy Thomas. I'm one of the few people who don't love Chris Claremont's run on the X-Men. There are certainly stories there I like, but I think overall, sometimes it gets a little gas baggy. And then they're not wrong with that. You need those issues. But I think, if I had to pick one, I'd pick Roy Thomas. Now, you can't have Chris Claremont without that. It's so important to understand that they built a structure that Chris Claremont could come into and then have a long and successful run.
Yeah.
What makes what Kirkman did with The Walking Dead and Invincible different is that there was no structure for that. There was, but it wasn't in those stories. It was in the publisher of Image Comics. Right? Walking Dead does not work as a long run series if Image wasn't already in a position to have a long run series, right? If it wasn't for Spawn and Wildcats and Savage Dragon, and there's some others that I'm clearly not thinking of.
You got the main ones.
Right. You couldn't have 125 issues of Walking Dead with one creator.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't have worked. Now, do I think The Walking Dead should have gone 125 issues? It probably should have gone a few more.
Well, luckily it did.
Well,
it went to 155, right?
Whatever. I mean, it probably should have gone. I don't think they came to a good ending.
No.
Let's put it that way. But I think what you see is the difference between early success and late success.
Yeah.
The Walking Dead became popular very early, and the series was made very early. So now you have the writer of the series is also the writer of the comic was also the showrunner of the series for a while, was also in, Robert Kirkman was doing everything. And I think the comic book suffered for it.
Yeah.
And that's where a great example of handing this off to somebody like, I don't know, Rodney Barnes, or, somebody who can write that style horror would have been super handy for that series, because I think it would have let it stay stronger and come to a more satisfying conclusion.
Okay.
Sorry, I just had with Invincible wasn't huge until Invincible was basically done. It was popular in the comic book world, but nobody was like, oh, we need to make this a series. Oh, we need to make this an animated thing, until the comic was basically done. So it turns into this idea of Robert Kirkman was able to make one stronger because he was able to focus on it exclusively rather than being pulled several places. And I think we see that in other runs as well. Other long runs of things. Spawn routinely gets weaker every time Todd goes off and tries to get a Spawn movie made. Or makes a gunslinger Spawn, or makes another Spawn, or makes another character, or does something. It
dilutes the title.
It creates patchiness.
Yeah.
And And it creates things like we see happening now with Spawn, where it's, its name is getting dragged through the mud because of some stuff that I'm not even sure Todd is aware of. And we're not really going to get into, right? We're just, it's, if he had moved on from that character and let somebody else take that character, he may not be in the situation he's in right now.
Well, and you can even leave that out,
right?
And let's completely throw that out and just think about what and where is Spawn right now. And maybe it's me, but I'll tell you that I think of like gimmick signed copies, and I don't think of anything to do with the narrative of Spawn when I think of Spawn where it's at right now.
Right.
I will say that the whole Spawn universe thing, I will fully admit that I'm behind on checking it all out. I was excited about the idea, but then I never really saw much buzz about any of the other titles that came out. But I was curious about that initiative because it is a change. It is a shakeup in the narrative, but I don't know that it's really led anywhere that, King Spawn and Hell Spawn or She Spawn and all that stuff. I don't know if it's really led anywhere that people are super excited about. I know Gunslinger Spawn is very, very popular as a character. And I know the art has been lauded, like Brett Booth's stuff on it's been lauded, but I don't know about the storytelling. And if anybody's in chat's read it and thinks it's awesome, let me know. If you think it's been, kind of a shakeup, I'm curious to see that, because I think that's a very good example of a creator who's been on something for so long. I mean, I would just love to see somebody else in there kind of, my dream on that one. I'd love to see Christopher Priest get in there and, wreck some stuff on Spawn or whatever, or somebody else.
Well, and the other example, and I go to Image for this again, is Savage Dragon. Savage Dragon hasn't been good since Savage Dragon met President Obama. And he wasn't even president yet. Like, that's how long Savage Dragon has been not great. And it's because there's one storyteller, and there's one vision, and there's one idea. And while that can help, it can also drastically hurt you.
Yeah.
So I think this idea of trying to find a balance is super important. And so I kind of gave my thought, right? Like, do 20 issues at most, 25 issues to make the number round, right? And then take a break and let somebody else tell some stories. And then come back and then take a break and let somebody else tell some stories. Where do you find based on your reading, Bronze, what do you think a happy medium might look like? Like, and let's try and stick to the big two, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're, unfortunately, Image, because of the creator-owned faction of the whole thing, is probably not going to change that.
Yeah.
Because it's creator-owned. But when you can have an editorial oversight that can say, oh, you know what, we need to move directions. We need to stop doing all of this Avengers versus X-Men, X-Men this, X-Men that terribleness, and let Jonathan Hickman just go. And let him rebuild this world.
Yeah.
Okay, now we've done that for a while. Now what's our next move? That's an editorial decision. So what does that look like? What do you think is kind of a healthy medium there?
So for me, I'll give you the short answer and I'll give you the longer explanation behind it. The short answer is, I think 36 issues, 3 years. And that is with a writer and or an artist, by the way. I mean, or in my personal preference, both consecutively. I love the dynamic of an artist and a writer working together for a while, as long as deadlines can be met, of course. I would love to see that, because that to me is it's the length of time for you to do. Let's say you're coming into X-Men. Let's say you're, Joss Whedon and John Cassaday coming into X-Men. I laugh because that's a problematic person in some ways now, but at the same time, the story run on X-Men was a very good refresh on that title. And you come in. Okay, I think it was needed at the time, is my personal opinion.
Oh, was it needed? Absolutely, but I think it was trash.
Okay, fair enough. But I'm just thinking of the example of coming in. It gives you some time to play around with the characters, to set your tone for what the character or characters are going to be like, and to kind of set up a villain or an antagonist in the plot that is going to have time to play out. You need the time, in my opinion, on the best runs, you need the time to not just set up your story, tell us the action, and get to the conclusion, that standard 3 acts. If you condense that down too far, I think you don't give the team time to breathe a little bit in there, because in an ideal world, they're not just telling that story step by step and it's done. They need to be able to throw in the beats of, like, say, a villain of the week comes in between 2 stories, and you don't see why that matters for the overall direction of the story at the time, but it introduces a MacGuffin that comes up later. You need the ability to kind of insert those things into your story without feeling rushed, without feeling like that pressure is there. Now, that said, if a team wants to come in and they say, we've got 12 issue arc that we want to do on this title, I'm cool with that, because if they have a nice tight story they can tell, great. The idea of having long running creators on a title, I think it's an ideal. I don't know if comics today are set up to do that successfully. I maybe would be more happy if we went to the system where they tried that. And then, like we've talked about in the past, or, I've kind of expressed my opinion on it, disguised how that happens with, you can keep going with something like the legacy numbers, keep that going, and then you relaunch with the story arc that's going to take place over the next 12 issues or the next 6 issues or whatever. I'm okay with that. If that's what you need for marketing purposes, great. But I want to be able to say, I have Spider-Man in my pull box, I have X-Men in my pull box, and I want to be able to read it from when a creative team takes over, and not be confused, off-put by changes in what's happening in the story, by crossover events, by meddling, all those different things that can happen by, all of a sudden a fill-in artist pops in for 2 or 3 issues and it's this weird story that doesn't really jive with anything you've been reading. I want to eliminate all that to make it better for readers who are reading that title, and to have their kind of cohesive vision by the time they're done realized for everybody involved.
See, and I kind of hate the filler issues.
Yeah.
Like, I dislike when you're telling me a good story and then there's a story where nothing really happens, right? Like, it's like in Dungeons and Dragons where your character has to rest. I don't need my comic book characters to rest. Like, don't give me a story where you do nothing, where it's just like, okay, we're gonna regroup and figure our lives out.
Counterpoint to that, though, we talked about it earlier, and I think this is the perfect example of where that works. Walking Dead. One of the best things about Walking Dead is they'd get done with some cataclysmic event, the prison, blah, 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 whatever happens, and they'd move on, and you'd have an issue where 80% of it is them figuring out how they're going to gather food and resources, or somebody has an idea and it helps the group out and they all kind of rally behind it. You get that, because what it did in that title is it got the sense of, okay, we're trying to stay positive, we're trying to keep going, we're trying to fight
We're establishing normalcy.
Yes, before you upset the apple cart again. And I think that narratively that is important. You have to have those non sequitur beats, but the best writers, the best creative teams are able to make that meaningful while it happens. Unfortunately, in modern comic books, those issues do tend to end up being like, kind of garbage fillers. But I think when it works best, it actually does serve a really good purpose and can be entertaining while it's being told. Unfortunately, that needs to get better in comics. I completely agree with that.
See, I believe the best creators can do it in a couple of panels, maybe a page, rather than having to take entire issues, right? And I understand the reason you do it. Don't misunderstand me. But I hate those books. I hate them. Can't stand them.
They tend to be pretty bad. I do agree with that.
And they tend to be, as a retailer, they tend to be the things that wind up in your dollar bins. So it's important to know that, right? Yeah. is part of why I dislike them. You essentially are just giving people an extra year on a title, 12 extra months. Cut out the filler, give me all the steak and none of the sizzle, and let's cut this in 2 years. Let's go. And it's a difference. It's a difference in our reading style, right? I don't care about the nuance of, are we able to find food? I'm just going to go ahead and assume they find food. I've never cared about what restaurant Superman's eating at. Why would I care about what they're doing in another book, right? For sustenance. So it's this idea of, I think, too, like, why it works in The Walking Dead and doesn't work in other books is the context of The Walking Dead, right? Like, this is a literal survival story, and so finding food and water is actually a much higher stakes game in The Walking Dead than it is in Metropolis. You know what I mean? Like, so it's why it works in some stories and doesn't in others. Because I wouldn't necessarily call those filler books, even though that's what they wind up being.
Yeah, it's different though, because Walking Dead is kind of a good and a bad example. And I wish I could remember which run it's part of. I can't remember if it's part of King's run or if it's part of Tynion's run. There's a story in Batman where Batman and Superman and Lois and Catwoman go on a double date. And ostensibly, it's totally a filler issue.
Mm-hmm.
But in practice, it actually is a fantastic issue that shows the comparisons and then the contrasting points between who Batman and Superman are and between who Lois Lane and Catwoman are. And you get these great comedic moments where they're trying to kind of one up each other as they're at a carnival. It serves a good point for the character development within that run.
But what I mean by that is, you never see an issue where Superman has to buy a pizza. Right? Like, it's not a thing, because food and water are relatively low stakes in Gotham or in Metropolis.
Well, right.
Now, these characters dating is super high stakes, and it's a different thing. So, like I said, it depends on the context of the story.
Yeah. So, I'm just saying, like, that you don't normally see filler issues that are related to finding food and water in a superhero title, but it's a lot different in a survival comic book. It's correct. Yeah.
Right. No, like I said, I dislike filler, but I wouldn't call those filler in Walking Dead. I just call them weaker books. So let's do this. Let's grab our second break. When we come back, we are going to pivot off of this topic a little bit. We're going to hit some of your comments.
Yep.
That you've posted, but we're going to talk about something else here. Before we go to break, I just want to say real quick, guys, when you come back, I'm going to turn this great big light off. I'm going to be kind of in the dark. I'm suffering from a pretty bad headache, and it's getting a little tough to stare at that light and look at my camera at the same time. So just know, if I look different, that's why. But we will be back in just a minute to tell you more about other shows here on The Experience and to talk about something else that's important to Bronze and I. So, stick around.
Imagine being at a convention and going to an interview panel that's just for you. No bustling crowds, no hours-long lines, just you, the moderator, and your favorite comic book creators. Well, this is pretty much that. Miss Jen sits down every week with 2 comic book creators for a live stream interview about their latest work, and you can ask them whatever you want. It's Talking Shop, Mondays at 5 Eastern on The Experience, Comic Culture and Sales.
My name is Mark Weiss, and I am the founder and president of an organization called Comic Books for Kids. 6 years ago this month, we embarked on a journey of passion and heart. Our goal was to make a difference for children in hospitals and cancer centers. We want to thank our friends for allowing us their support and for providing us with the means to make so many happy with their gracious give to us.
Did you know that every Experience show, including some exclusive content, streams on Twitch? Check it out, twitch.tv/the _EXP. Or just scan that QR code.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Devil's Advocates. I am Kyle. That is Bronze Age Nerd, and I am now in the dark.
Actually looks pretty cool, to be honest with you.
I like this lighting, but I feel like a little vampire-y.
That's fair. I mean, but hey, it's helping with the migraine and everything. That's what matters.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to kind of make sure we get a chance to get to some of your comments that we've been marking throughout the show that we think are definitely worth talking about. If you guys are watching it for the first time, or if you made comments and you're wondering why we don't get to them, sometimes we have this back and forth and we want to keep that going, and it's kind of hard to interrupt that momentum. We always look at all your comments that come through, and we get to any of them at a good point in the show where we can. We love that you do that, so please keep up the comments. I'm going to go back to Michael Patrick Sullivan here, who says, I like it when a writer creates something and eventually ends it without handing it off. Walking Dead, James Robinson, Starman, lots of BKV stuff. So, there is absolutely an argument to be made for one voice throughout. I think we've kind of covered the pros and cons of that a little bit. Hopefully you agreed with some of that conversation, or you had some great points that you're going to leave in the comments for us or in the chat. But I definitely think that there are times for it, and there are times where it hasn't worked out so well. But I will say the romantic in me loves the idea of a creator just working on something for the entire length of its run. I definitely understand the appeal of that for sure.
And especially because, again, you talk about James Robinson, Starman is maybe the only exception on that list. Creator-owned comics.
Yeah.
Brian K. Vaughan has owned so much of his own work for so long.
Yeah.
Kirkman has owned his own work. James Robinson was a little bit of a different deal, but not that different, right? So there's a huge benefit to in a creator-owned setting like that, having one clarion voice.
And for some reason, I don't know why, reading that comment made me think of one of my favorite examples of a long, successful run by one writer, but primarily one writer, and that's Neil Gaiman on Sandman. So I think that's an important one that should get added in there as well.
Well, and Brian K. Vaughan on Saga.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Or I mean, even Ex Machina is another really good one too.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the comment there, Michael. I really appreciate that. Sean, I wanted to talk about what you said, which is I found myself having a hard time sticking with a long run of something like Something Is Killing the Children. Something Is Killing Children is still going. I stopped at issue 30, I think. I'll just tell you my response to that. Something Is Killing the Children I came in very late on, and I liked it way, way more than I expected to. I did not expect to like that title just because I thought it was hyped up, and I was like, man, I bet you this isn't that great. Read it, and it's very simplistic on a surface level. And for some reason, I still really, really enjoy reading it. I will tell you that I don't enjoy reading it month to month for me. And I don't know if that's maybe a difference. I enjoy reading it as volumes come out, and, I hate the term, but kind of binge reading it or whatever. In one sitting, and maybe that's something that might help you enjoy it more. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe that's how you read it already, and you just don't like it anymore. But I also think that a lot of people will agree with you that after issue, I think it was 16 or so, when they started doing the origin of Erica Slaughter, they kind of finished up the first story arc. I think a lot of people actually kind of feel the same way you do there.
Sean's heard me say this. I think Tinian is out here doing too much.
Yeah.
The first 16 issues of Something Is Killing the Children were some of the best comic writing I've ever read.
Yeah.
Just phenomenal. And then it was, well, he's doing Something Is Killing the Children and the nice house on the last house on the lake on the banks of the place with the basket full of heads and the thing. And he had 9 or 10 titles at DC.
Yep.
Horror titles. And then there were other Something Is Killing the Children, House of Boucher, and House of Dune House Arc, whatever. He's writing so much stuff that he can't pay attention to the thing.
Yeah.
And I know that writers are able to do that. They're able to compartmentalize. They're able to write 4 or 5 issues of this week and write 4 or 5 issues of the next thing next week. Whatever. But I think some of what happened with Something is Killing the Children is that Tinian got spread too thin.
It's possible. And the
Pick back up.
okay.
And half dozen issues or so, it's gotten better again. But I think it's because he found his footing in this new kind of I'm doing all this stuff and is able to sort of push it, right? And so Something is Killing the Children is a unique example where having one writer on it for a long time both hurts and helps. It hurt because when he had other things he had to do, it suffered. But because that clarion vision still existed, once that writer was able to recover, the book was able to elevate again.
And you mentioned the spinoff, especially with House of Slaughter. If I recall correctly, he wrote the first arc on that and then handed it over. I cannot remember who wrote the second arc. Those are the 2 arcs that I've read. I will actually say that I think I might be in the minority here. I think the second arc was probably better than the first one too. So I think that's kind of maybe some more evidence of passing it off and having somebody else tell a story in their voice.
The House of Butcher one shot. The joke is we call it House of Boucher because it's not spelled like butcher.
Right.
And it takes place in Louisiana.
Yeah.
Right. So it's totally Bobby Boucher. Mama said to kill the monsters. But I'm sorry, that impression did not come through the way it needed to. I apologize.
That was more of an impression of the Water Boy than it was anything in the book, I bet.
Correct. Bobby Boucher from the Water Boy.
Yeah. Just to explain for people, I mean, we're of an age now where a lot of people don't know that reference.
If you don't know the Water Boy, stop watching this show and go watch the Water Boy. It's maybe Henry Winkler's greatest performance.
That's and Carl Weathers, rest in peace. Great performance there.
He was great in that too. But yeah, no. Like I said, Something is Killing the Children is an example where both ends work.
Yeah.
And then Sean's last comment is an interesting one.
Yeah, for Marvel and DC, I've never read any of the long titles that are your 300 to 1,000. I think you mean issues long. Or titles, maybe you mean titles long, and you're talking about the subtitles that often follow some of these books.
But I think you probably have, Sean. I think you've probably read Spider-Man, and you've probably read Superman, and you've probably read The Flash and Batman, and you've probably read Fantastic Four and the Hulk. Can you all hear my stomach through the microphone?
No, I can't.
Okay, because that was a very loud grumble. It's very angry. So like I said, I think you probably have, but you haven't read them all. And it's an interesting kind of thing, right? Like, of those series, I think I've read every Spider-Man except for a handful here lately. Maybe in the last 6 months, I've fallen off. But yeah, I'm kind of the same way. It's a tough thing to do. So,
and I understand the perspective. I respect your opinion. I'm the weirdo who goes, I guess it's weird. Oh wow, this title's at 600 or 700 issues long. They must be doing something right. I kind of want to jump in and read it. And I mean, that doesn't work all the time. I don't read every comic that's up there in those kind of numbers, but if I wasn't reading Superman, I did not read a lot of it. And once it started to kind of get up there in the numbers, I decided to kind of jump back on for the first time since the death of Superman, just to see where it's at. So that does happen sometimes. Cool.
Absolutely.
Well, we appreciate you guys sharing all your thoughts. I did have one thing I want to talk about. It's a little bit of a turn, but I think it's for a great cause.
Here, we're gonna do a thing. Hold on.
Okay.
There you go.
Perfect. So I went to a comic swap in Portland this weekend, the Frankenstein comic swap. It was a great time. I went down with another YouTuber and a friend, and did not expect to run into a bunch of people, but I ran into a bunch of people. A lot of people you guys probably know. You might want to check my socials for all the kind of updates about that. One of the people I ran into is somebody who I love running into, Jen, aka Comics Will Break Your Heart. And unfortunately, Jen has been dealing with a fight with cancer for some time now. And I really just wanted to take a second here at the end of the show after speaking with her. You'll see in a video I have on my channel coming up soon, a little short interview with her. We don't really talk about that so much because of reasons, but I just wanted to kind of take a second to remind everybody she has a GoFundMe. She's very close to her goal on that GoFundMe. She's at right now she's at $23,200 of $25,000 goal, and so that she's really close to her goal. And I don't want to tell her story. I don't want to get too personal details, but there's treatments and stuff that are still going to be happening, and through the summer and that kind of stuff. So we definitely want to try to support her if that's interesting to you. She's a fantastic, positive member of the community. I highly recommend, if you just want to go check out like her Instagram or something like that and go kind of get familiar with her. You can catch, she does a lot of stuff with comics with Bueller, for example, and has been on his show and stuff before. So go check her out. Go check out some of her appearances. And most importantly, if you feel like supporting a great cause and helping a fellow comic fan fight that fight, please consider going to the GoFundMe that Jay just posted a link into all of our various chats there. So go check that out, please. And I would really personally appreciate it. And I know Jen would too. So I just want to take that time to say that. Thanks a lot, everybody, for listening to me talk about that for a few minutes.
Absolutely. And I think we can all agree, fuck cancer.
Exactly. 100%.
So awesome.
Yep. Cool.
If you guys go click on the link, do the thing. Don't super chat us for a while. Give the money there.
There you go. Yeah. And if you don't want to type in the whole thing, just search Keep Jen Reading GoFundMe and you'll find it right away.
Absolutely. So, all right, everybody. Thank you for being here. We will be back next week with a different topic. I can't remember what that topic is, but we will make a thumbnail and get it out there to the world for the next topic. And we will see everybody next time.
Have a great night.
Join the party. Head over to our link tree to find all the links for everywhere the experience is all the time.